Hi guys, this is Miss Sheely. This is the Chapter 1 lecture, the study of life, that we did not get to due to the senior assembly. All right, so the first thing that we want to do is review what our learning intentions are and what our success criteria are. Excuse me. We're going to learn about the characteristics of science today and the characteristics of life. As you can see, there are lots of success criteria or core competencies, that you will need to be able to do in order to be successful on this with this material. So first of all, what is biology? Biology is the study of living things, living organisms and their interactions with one another, but also their interactions with their environment. So we are going to go from the microscopic or cellular level all the way up to kind of the living organisms. We are going to get more towards the whole living planet, the ecosystems and biospheres a little bit more next semester. So first of all, what is science in general? Science is the way that scientists work and think. Biology is a science, but what is science? Science itself, in Latin, the word is scientia, and that means knowledge. So the scientific method, just trying to determine what things are, how things work, coming up with a question, then forming a hypothesis, and testing that until we figure out what's going on. So in your notebook, I want you to pause the video and take a moment to list the steps in the process of the scientific method that you know. So remember, pause the video and take a moment to brainstorm what you remember. All right, so hopefully you did take a moment to do that. So what does it mean? This is our scientific method. So we have observation first, question, then you come up with a hypothesis. This hypothesis is your proposed answer based on research that you've done or based on prior knowledge of research. You're going to conduct a controlled experiment. Okay, so we're talking about what that means. You're going to collect your results, which means not just collecting your data, but also analyzing it. All those statistics that you learned last semester, they're coming into play now in biology class. Then we're going to be able to take that analysis of the data, and we're going to form a conclusion and then write up that conclusion to report the findings to others. So the big thing about a hypothesis is that our hypothesis must be falsifiable. What does that mean? Well, it means it must be testable. So if it's testable, it should also be falsifiable because results could disprove it. So we're not always trying to support our hypothesis. Sometimes we're trying to falsify our hypothesis. The other thing, and this is a huge new way of thinking about science possibly for you, science doesn't claim to prove anything. We're not proving anything. Your data does not prove a hypothesis, okay? We can't do that because scientific understandings, they're always subject to modification and further information. There's no way that any one person could collect all the data that's needed in order to prove anything from any experiment. Okay, so we're supporting our hypothesis or not supporting it, which could lead to falsification. All right, so we're going to take a moment to compare natural sciences to social sciences, okay? So hopefully with your exploration in psychology, you have a little bit of understanding of the difference between these. But a natural science is a field of science that's related to the physical world and its phenomena and processes, whereas social sciences contrast with natural science, because they're typically based on qualitative data, descriptions. So what are some examples of natural sciences versus life sciences? Well, natural sciences would include all life sciences. So anything that involves the study of living things. So this would include biology. It would also include ecology and anatomy. Physical sciences, that's going to be the study of non-living matter, and that would include physics, chemistry, but also astronomy, geology. You do have some interdisciplinary natural sciences. These are disciplines like biophysics and biochemistry. And that's because they build on both the life sciences, the study of living things, and the physical sciences, the study of non-living matter. Another name for natural sciences is hard sciences. And the reason why natural sciences can be referred to as hard sciences is because they rely on quantitative data or numerical data. Remember those social sciences that we talked about at the beginning, I talked about at the beginning of this slide, they are going to be typically based on qualitative data or descriptions. So sociology, human behavior, economics, archaeology, psychology, all of those are social sciences. All right, so science's goal is to know, but how does the world work? Okay. We have two different types of reasoning that we as humans can do to get this information, to know things. We have what's called inductive reasoning, and we have what's called deductive reasoning. And inductive reasoning is based on just what you observe and your prior knowledge, and you're drawing a conclusion, okay? Whereas deductive reasoning is a specific conclusion that then can be followed by a general theory that helps to support that conclusion. All right, so we also have some ideas of basic science and applied research. Basic science, this is just the question of, is it even valuable to study science simply to gain knowledge? So basic science is gaining knowledge by studying. So studying science just to get knowledge, to learn more. But applied science, that's going to be, is this worthy? Can we apply it to a specific problem that will actually help us better our lives? There is also a role of serendipity in research and discoveries. You could have some basic science that leads to applied science. If you remember the story of penicillin, and that was started as basic science. And then when the penicillin grew, they were actually able to apply that and turn it into a medicine. All right, so here is the peer review process. So this is taking your writing. You're used to focusing here on the idea, theory, hypothesis. You're starting with the thought, and you're writing and researching, and then maybe you're going to publish it. You're typically thinking about publishing to your teacher, okay? But if we were actual scientists, we would then, in order to have that article, we would send it to a journal editor. Okay. And then that journal editor would find 3 to 5 people that are experts in the field that that your manuscript is in. They would review it. And then the journal editor would make a decision as whether they should accept your manuscript, whether they need to send it back to you and say to revise it, or whether they should just reject it in general. This whole process is to make sure that every piece of research is original, significant, logical, and thorough. Scientific writing is very concise and it's very accurate. There is no fluff. All right, so how are papers organized? Well, there is an acronym that you can use, IMRAD, to remember this. The I stands for introduction. Sorry, my animations aren't working. So the I stands for introduction. This is going to be your background information, your justification for work, your hypothesis, your research question. You're also going to cite relevant published scientific works of others. Again, you're doing a research project this year, so we will come back to this idea of IMRAD. So I, introduction. The M in IMRAD is your materials and methods, your M&M. This is typically always together, so we just give it one M in the IMRAD. This is going to be all your materials, all your methods, any special techniques that you use to gather the data, and a sufficient level of detail to allow repeatability of others. A lot of times we in class, in order to practice this, will be doing an annotated drawing of our setup. The R in IMRAD, R/A is results and analysis. So this is going to be your tables, your graphs, your report findings. Not any meaning with them, but just your data in an organized fashion so that someone can look at it and draw some conclusions. Then for the D, that's your discussion, formerly known as a conclusion. This is your interpretation of the results. You're going to relate your current findings, your figures, your bars, your graphs, your tables, all of that to other studies and be able to draw some conclusions, to make some connections between current findings, prior knowledge, and what you found. Most scientific papers also have a title and an abstract. So an abstract is kind of like the back of a book, a quick little summary of what's going on. But they're also going to have an acknowledgement and reference section. So acknowledgements, thanking anyone or any organization that helped the scientific paper get published, helped in the aid of the experiment itself. And then, of course, a reference section for any and all resources that were cited or referenced for background knowledge. All right, so science paper format. We will be reading a few scientific papers this year, throughout the year. So I do want you to familiarize yourself with the format so that you know where to look for certain information. In addition, your lab reports will kind of contain these elements as well. So understanding what goes where will really help to improve your scores, okay? All right, so the first thing we have is we have your title, your author, your abstract, any keywords. So this is descriptive information that can be found at the beginning. Then your meat and potatoes is here in your orange box. You have your introduction, your methods, your results, and then your discussion or your I'm rad part that we talked about in the other one. Your introduction is the why, your methods is the how, your results are the what, and then your discussion is your so what. Who cares? What does this mean? All right, so now you're going to take a few minutes, and for the next few slides, you might need to pause. You're going to determine whether each object in each slide is living, non-living, or was it once living? And then you're going to provide a justification. I want you to record these thoughts in your notebook. It does not have to be elaborate. You do not have to write in complete sentences. You do want to, though, write what the organism is. All right, so let's do one together, and then you can do some on your own and pause. All right, so the first one we have, hopefully you're able to look at this and say, well, this is a plant. So the first thing I would do in my notebook is I would write plant, and then whether I think it is living, once living, or non-living. So I think that this plant is living. And what's my justification? Well, if I look closely, I can see some new growth and some old growth. These leaves here are larger, so they're clearly older growth, and then I can see some new growth here. So this indicates to me that it's living. All right, so this next one is a lima bean seed. So take a moment, pause, and determine whether you think it is living, once living, non-living, and then justify your answer. All right, so hopefully you took that assignment, that activity seriously, and then you paused the images and actually took some time to write whether they were living, non-living, once living, or and then you justified it. So I want you to take another moment now and pause if you have to, and think about the previous images and what you wrote, and come up with some characteristics. Brainstorm, propose some characteristics that would indicate that something is alive to you now that you've gone through some sample activities, some sample or things. All right, so let's go over the characteristics of life themselves. I'm sorry, my contacts drive me crazy, and it is hot in my office. All right, so order. So you can see here, hopefully this is this kind of information, but all living things have order. Organisms themselves are highly organized. They are coordinated structures that consist of one or more cells. The levels of organization increase in complexity as an organism develops. So you can see that cells themselves are organized because they have organelles on the inside. Tissues are organized as they are made up of groups of cells. Organs are organized because they are made up of groups of tissues, and so on and so on. All organisms respond to stimuli. You can see here, this is a Venus flytrap with a grub of some sort. This response to stimuli can be either positive or negative response. So the stimulus is, and here is one with the sunflowers. All right, so all organisms, when they respond to stimulus, either positive or negatively, the stimulus itself is just a detectable change in the internal or external environment. So you respond to stimulus sometimes when your blood sugar drops and you need food in you. Taxis itself, that's a movement in response to a stimulus. So in both of those videos, you saw taxis. Phototaxis, that was the example of the sunflowers, the plant stem growing towards the light. And chemotaxis, that's going to be movement in relation to a chemical stimulus. And that is what the Venus flytrap was doing as well. All right, so reproduction. Single-celled organisms are going to reproduce by dividing equally into two new identical cells, but multicellular organisms are going to reproduce using cells called gametes, eggs and sperm, that need to fuse together during fertilization to form a new individual. But the bottom line is, all living organisms, whether they are single-celled or multicellular organisms, are going to reproduce. Adaptations are changes within a species, within a population, that allow the population to adjust to the environment to aid survival. These adaptations could be behavioral or physical. So for example, this mole here, he doesn't need much vision because he lives underground, but he needs big digging devices. So he has giant claws. So each of these other 7 organisms, they have adaptations that allow them to better survive. Growth and development. So growth just means your cells increase in size and number. But development as you're going to see here, this is differentiated into specialized tissues within a multicellular organism. Genes are going to direct the differentiation of the cells. That all cells start out similar, but as the organism develops, some will they will become certain cells and others will become other cells. So we have our legs, we've got our behaviors of learning to hunt. We now have gills. All right, so regulation. There are mechanisms to coordinate internal functions, respond to stimuli, and cope with environmental stress. So this is internal regulation and response. So consider what happens when you exercise. You're lifting things. Muscles are going to need more energy. If your body doesn't increase your blood flow and nutrient transport to these tissues, then the muscles will begin to rebel or cramp. Also, you need to make sure that you're getting more oxygen. You're able to create that energy. All right, homeostasis. This is what I was talking about in terms of your blood sugar. So, homeostasis is maintenance of a steady state of conditions. Examples of things within your body that need to maintain homeostasis: your body temperature, the pH of your body, your skin, your blood, all of that. Everything has a different pH level. The concentration of chemicals, the amount of oxygen, the amount of carbon dioxide, that type of thing, as well as your sugar level. Energy processing. Organisms are going to use a source of energy for their metabolic activities. So everything initially gets their energy from the sun through the process called photosynthesis. So in photosynthesis, plants are going to be able to take that light energy, they're going to turn it into chemical energy that they can use themselves, or they can be eaten by others, by heterotrophs, and then whether they are an autotroph themselves or they're a heterotroph, all living organisms are going to perform cellular respiration and break down that energy from the food. And so we will spend a week on each of these processes later in the semester. Another characteristic of life is evolution or natural selection. Evolution or natural selection just means change over time. These are when adaptations change over time, these adaptations that allow the organisms to survive. So here you have two different examples. You have the evolution of Darwin's finches and the results of that evolution. And then you also have, you may not have known the history of horses to our present day horse, modern thoroughbred from the ancestor 54 million years ago. Oops, I went the wrong way. All right, so let's talk about levels of organization. Lastly, our first level of organization. So remember that organization itself as a characteristic of life, that starts here with the cell. But organization itself starts with the atom. And then the groups of atoms are going to form molecules. Groups of molecules are going to form macromolecules. Macromolecules are going to work together to form an organelle. And then we get to our characteristic of life and that organization of a cell. So let's talk about that cellular organization. Organelles, those are small structures in cells that are made of molecules. We're going to spend a whole week on organelles and cell different types. But cells are made of organelles that function together to carry out a purpose. It could be just the smallest. It is the smallest fundamental unit of structure and function in a living organism. So one cell can be a living organism, but lots of living organisms can be multicellular. So here you have some examples of unicellular and some examples of multicellular organisms. All right. Organismal organization includes your tissues, which are groups of cells, your organs, which are groups of tissues performing a common function. An organ system is organs that relate together functionally, and then organisms would be our individual living entity. You also have ecological organization. There's so much organization. So you have an individual, which would be species, but a group of individuals of a species in the same area, that's a population. So just one area of a type of salamander, say, is going to be a population of salamanders. We're not talking about the species of salamanders as a whole. So one group of organisms, species in an area's population. When you start to include other populations that are in that same area, that's a community. When we still stay in that same particular area, we keep all of our communities, all of our different populations, but we start to also add in the abiotic or non-living factors that those living things interact with. That's the ecosystem. A biome is going to be a particular community that is based on temperature and rainfall. We're going to focus on biomes next spring. And then the biosphere itself is the zones of life on Earth. So it's the collection of all ecosystems. Life is really diverse. So this is an example of a phylogenetic tree. This is going to show evolutionary relationships. There are 3 domains of life. We have bacteria, archaea, and eukaryota. LUCA is an abbreviation for last universal common ancestor. We don't know what LUCA is, but we do know that there are traits of bacteria and archaea and eukaryota that definitely came from each other, came from a last universal common ancestor. All right, so take a moment, pause the video, but in your notebooks, I want you to brainstorm as many fields of biology as you can. Can you name 5? Can you name 10? Can you name more than 10? Take a moment, pause, see what you got. All right, here are some examples. So you have applied biology fields at the top. So biology for purpose, and then you have basic biology, biology for study, for the sake of learning at the bottom. So take a moment and see if you got any of these. Did you get any others that aren't listed here? Bring them to class. Let's talk. And then last but not least, this is your success criteria. Can you identify the characteristics of science? Can you summarize the steps of the scientific method? Can you differentiate basic science from applied science? Can you differentiate inductive from deductive reasoning? We're going to have some examples of that as well in class. Can you summarize the steps of the scientific method? Can you list the shared characteristics of living systems? Can you describe different levels of biological organization? Can you list the 3 domains? And can you state a few or several fields of biology? Thanks, guys. Sorry we weren't able to get to this in class. I appreciate you taking the time to complete this on your own.